Antigua and Barbuda are two separate islands in the Caribbean, but they share many similarities, and so it makes sense that they've been joined together as one country since 1967. The name Antigua and Barbuda comes from the Spanish Santa Maria de la Antigua and Barbuda. Antigua means old and Barbuda means not old, so literally the names translates to something like old and not old. But how did these islands end up with such confusing names? Well, let's go back in time and find out. The first people to settle in Antigua were the Arawak people who came from the island of Trinidad. They created small villages on the island and thrived until the Caribs attacked them and forced them into slavery or killed them. Luckily for the ancestors of modern-day Antigua, the Caribs weren't too keen on settling down and building permanent villages. Instead, they preferred to live on their boats and travel around the Caribbean, eating fish and hunting wild animals. They weren't entirely uncivilized, though, as they were known to trade with the Arawaks and even held festivals where they would bring their best catch of fish or the pelt of the animal they had hunted and then trade them amongst themselves. This way of life continued until the Europeans arrived in the mid-15th century. In 1493, Christopher Columbus sailed past the islands, but he didn't actually set foot there. In fact, he thought he was actually off the coast of India, hence why he named the native people Indians. When the Spanish began exploring the islands in greater detail, they found that it was uninhabited except for a few Carib tribes. The Spanish also built a few settlements on the island, but it was never a priority for them, as other islands seemed much more promising. This is also why the islands remained largely untouched by the slave trade, as the Spanish were only interested in mining and growing crops rather than herding cattle. In 1632, an English explorer named John Hawkins landed on the island of Antigua and saw how well the cattle were doing, and so he decided to take 200 of them back to England. He became so successful at this that it was said that at one point, he owned 1/3 of all the cattle in England. As a reward for his hard work, King Charles I gave him the right to colonize the island of St. John, which is now part of Antigua and Barbuda. A group of settlers led by Thomas Warner established the first English settlement on Antigua in 1635. He also introduced sugarcane to the island, which proved very successful. To run the plantation, he brought over African slaves, which caused a huge amount of suffering and is a dark stain on the history of the country. It would be another 200 years before slavery was finally abolished. During the next 100 years, the British would fight multiple wars against the Spanish to keep control of the island, but eventually, they succeeded, and Antigua became a part of the British Empire. At this time, the population of Antigua was around 5,000, and most of them lived on sugar plantations owned by wealthy Europeans. The slaves grew sugar, tobacco, cotton, coffee and cocoa on the plantations, and the owners sold the products in Europe and the Americas. Slavery was brutal, and the slaves worked long hours for little food and no money. They weren't allowed to own property, and if they tried to run away, they would be caught and punished severely. Despite the hardship, the slaves held on to their culture and traditions, and this helped them survive. They developed a new religion called Obeah that combined elements of Christianity with traditional African beliefs. They also told stories and folk tales that were passed down from generation to generation. These stories often had happy endings, and they gave the slaves hope for a better future. Music was also an important part of their culture. They sang and danced to traditional African rhythms, and this helped them to keep their spirits high. The music they created on Antigua was a mixture of African and European styles, and it is still popular today. Finally, in 1834, slavery was officially abolished in Antigua, and the slaves were set free. But this didn't mean that their lives got any easier. Many of them continued to work on the plantations, but now they were paid very low wages. It wasn't until the 20th century that things began to change. The economy of Antigua diversified, and the living standards of the people began to rise. Meanwhile, the island of Barbuda had a very different history. The island was uninhabited for most of its history, until 1629 when a group of English settlers arrived. They quickly found that they couldn't compete with the Spanish in the sugar industry, so they focused on growing cotton instead. They also herded cattle and goats, which eventually became a major part of the economy. During World War II, the United States military used Barbuda as a base, and this brought some much-needed money to the island. After the war, Antigua and Barbuda became independent from the UK. However, it wasn't easy. There were many problems to solve, such as poverty, crime, and a lack of education. But the people of Antigua and Barbuda were determined to build a better future for themselves. They worked hard to improve their country, and it paid off. Today, Antigua and Barbuda is a thriving democracy with a growing economy. The country is known for its beautiful beaches, friendly people, and commitment to freedom and democracy. But back to the main topic of this video, how did these two separate islands become one country? Well, as I already mentioned, they both used to be colonies of the British Empire. However, they were separated for many years. Antigua gained independence from Britain in 1967, while Barbuda didn't follow suit until 4 years later, in 1971. Even so, Antigua and Barbuda were always close, and they decided to unite their two countries in 1978. This made sense for a few reasons. First, they both had a lot in common, including their language, culture, and history. Second, they were both small countries, and joining together would make them stronger economically and politically. Finally, they both had a long tradition of democracy and human rights. By joining together, they would be able to set an example for other countries in the region. The people of Antigua and Barbuda were excited to join together. They felt that it would give them more power and influence in the region. Plus, it would make traveling between the two islands much easier. There were some challenges, of course. For example, they had to agree on a new constitution and a new flag. But in the end, it was worth it. On November 1, 1978, Antigua and Barbuda officially became one country. The new nation was called Antigua and Barbuda. The country's first president was Sir Bert, and its first prime minister was Sir Bird. The two islands were still separate entities within the country. Antigua had its own capital, St. John's, and Barbuda had its own capital, Coderington, but now they could work together to solve regional problems such as crime and poverty. They could also work together to promote tourism and economic growth. The country was off to a good start. However, in the years that followed, it faced a number of challenges. The country's economy was hit hard by the global recession in the early 1980s. Tourism, which was one of the main sources of income, declined sharply, but the government was able to take out loans to help keep the country afloat. In the late 1980s, the country was hit by a series of hurricanes that caused widespread damage and left many people homeless. But the people of Antigua and Barbuda were resilient, and they worked hard to rebuild their country. Today, Antigua and Barbuda is a vibrant democracy with a thriving economy. The country has come a long way since it was first settled by the indigenous peoples centuries ago. From its days as a colonial outpost to its current status as an independent nation, Antigua and Barbuda has seen a lot of change. But through it all, the people of Antigua and Barbuda have remained strong and resilient. They've worked hard to build a better future for themselves and their country. And today, Antigua and Barbuda is a shining example of democracy and freedom in the Caribbean. The country's commitment to human rights and its vibrant civil society are a testament to the hard work and sacrifice of the people of Antigua and Barbuda over the years. Thank you for watching this video about the history of Antigua and Barbuda. If you enjoyed the video, please leave a comment below and tell me what you learned. I also have a page where I share interesting facts and history tidbits. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.